What if I were to tell you that the war between APS-C and full-frame digital cameras is over, and APS-C has won that war? It's not long that any professional or aspiring amateur worth his or her salt would aspire to a full-frame camera like this. This is an older D700. There are professionals who still use this camera today because it's wonderful. However, just a decade ago, the difference between full frame and APS-C was distinct. A set of images taken with a full frame camera versus or compared to a similar set of images taken with APS-C would be noticeable, especially to the trained eye. That is no longer the case. The advancements in technology have not only narrowed the gap, but they have almost eliminated it. The direction of camera gear is smaller and smaller. This is not a new phenomenon. This has been the case for decades. In the 50s and 60s, it was the war between large plate cameras and medium format. In the 70s and 80s, it was the war between medium format and 35mm, and so on. But unlike, say, cars, where innovations appear in the luxury models and work their way downwards, with photography, the innovation is upwards, and it begins with mobile phones. The greatest advancement in technology for photography is coming from mobile phones, which are by far the most popular platform for taking images today. So much so that over the last decade, they have all but wiped out compact cameras. But that technology is working its way upwards. The advancements in image quality, in light sensing and so on, has made its way to Micro Four Thirds and APS-C. And today, that very same set of images taken on APS-C and full frame, unless you literally magnify, identify and highlight any differences, to the naked eye, to the end viewer on a wall, in an album, in a magazine, online, there will be no difference whatsoever. And if there is no difference visibly, there is no difference. We could always highlight differences. We could always take images into Photoshop and multiply them hundreds of percent to try and identify the difference between this or that. There are thousands of YouTubers that do that every single day, but they're not photographers. They're camera gear salespeople. That's what they're concerned about. Making you feel that you need the newer body, the newer lens, the newer this, the newer that, so they can get an affiliated link. The vast majority of videos about photography on YouTube are about gear. They're not about the art of photography. And it is an art, and it is the photography that matters, especially today, more than ever before, because the gear is no longer relevant. Every camera available today is better than any camera that the greats like Margaret Bourke-White or Ansel Adams or Henri Bresson could have ever dreamed of. But even today, if we are going to highlight those differences, then that also applies to full frame, because if you are looking to go the extra mile from full frame, you would then go to medium format digital. And there are photographers today, under certain conditions, for whatever reason, who will actually even today shoot images on large format film. There's no comparison, even with the best Hasselblad. It doesn't come close to what can be done with large format film. But that is a very, very isolated case. And I'm not saying that there isn't a place for things, but only if they are needed for a specific reason. If you're a sports photographer, documentary photographer, landscape photographer, portrait photographer, you don't need the larger sensor size at all. Very, very, very limited cases where you could justify it. However, if you're shooting images for a stock library, that's a different story, because you are selling images to a professional who will scrutinize those images because they can, because stock libraries receive hundreds of thousands of images constantly from aspiring photographers, and they will go for the best of the best of the best. Just like in the 70s and 80s, they would ignore 35mm film and 6x6. They would normally go for 6x7. Today, they, in some way or another, they do the same thing. And you may have a Nikon D850 or Z9 or whatever, or Canon R6, but your work won't hold a candle to the photographer who has a Hasselblad. And in some cases, his work won't hold a candle to the photographer who has shot on large format film. They are specific cases. And in those instances, you do have to have the latest and greatest because they force you to. If you're shooting wedding photography, any of the other mainstream professional occupations to do with photography, nowadays you can do it all on an APS-C, but the APS-C will not hold the top spot for very long because Micro Four Thirds is hot on its tails. And even though it looked as though it was hesitating a little bit 2-3 years ago, it has in the last year or two gained momentum. We've seen tremendous advances, and it will not be long. It could be 2 or 3 years, it could be 5 or 10 years, but Micro Four Thirds will knock APS-C off the top spot because the direction of camera gear is smaller. Those of us who grew up on film are stuck with the full frame 35mm format in our heads, and we aspire towards it, and camera manufacturers understandably cash in on that. But do you really need it? Can your clients tell the difference? And the answer, invariably, 99% of the time, is no, you do not. And that's before we even start on AI technology, which is rapidly approaching. And once again, that will come from the mobile phones. Within 2-3 years, mobile phones will have AI technology that will recognize every single scene that you photograph and fill in the blanks and artificially improve it. And it won't be long before you will be able to shoot images on a mobile phone that will replicate some of the best cameras out there. Imagine once that technology makes its way to a professional camera like the Fuji or Sony or Nikon or any of the others. So if you're buying a full frame camera or aspiring to buy because you have a specific reason that you need one, that's fine. That would also apply if you wish to buy a Fuji GFX or a Hasselblad. But if you're buying one because you think that if I have a full frame camera, my images will be better, then I would urge you to think again, because the days of needing to do that are over. It is about the art. As I always say, photography is creativity, light, lens, camera. The camera comes last. I hope that this makes sense of it. Agree, disagree. I'd love to hear from you, and I'll see you in the next video.